Now, I don't usually tell my plans about what I'm going to do up front, and I have my reason for that because in the past, sometimes I would talk about the plans that I had. They'll be hyper ambitious, and then people that meant well would give me a lot of advice on why the plan that I was choosing to follow was unrealistic and probably not the best idea. But at this point, I do believe that I've done enough to be able to show that my methods and my ideas and my plans usually turn out more or less okay. So I'm going to talk about my plan to be able to study and get to a decent level of understanding Linux by passing the LPIC 1, the LPIC 2, the Linux Foundation Certified Systems Administrator, and also the Red Hat Certified Systems Administrator. Even though I don't really have a plan for the Red Hat one as of yet, but the other ones, I do have a plan of action that I want to be able to put into play. So I'm going to talk about the plan that I have. I'm going to talk about the study method that I want to use, the resources that I'm going to use. But what I won't talk about is the time frame that I'm going to be able to do this in because I don't actually do time frames generally. I don't do them because I have no idea when I'm actually going to be ready for the exam. All I know is that if I put in a certain amount of work over a certain amount of time, and it, inevitably, I am going to be ready to take the exam at some point. And when I get there, I'll just go ahead and use it. I'm going to talk about some things that I might do that's a little bit different, and also why I believe that performance based questions are better for me than multiple choice questions, which is why I'm excited for doing the Linux Foundation exam and also for the Red Hat Certified Systems Administrator. First of all, the first thing that I'm going to do, the first step that I'm going to take is to make sure that I'm familiar with Linux as best as I possibly can. Most of these exams do assume that you don't have that much experience with Linux, but they assume that you have at least some familiarity with it. So they're not taking a person that's from scratch or a person that's fully entry level. Yes, they might expect you to have a beginner level of knowledge when it comes to like systems administration, but they don't expect you to be too much. They just don't expect that this is your very first time ever going through Linux. I'm starting out with the Linux Essentials certification from LPI, and you can watch one of my videos where I talk about how I prepared for that exam in one day. It was in 24 hours. So I'm starting with that, but also I want to get a broader overview of Linux because it's not just about preparing for an examination, it's about making sure that I know my stuff and that I have the knowledge that I'm going to need. So, how am I going to get myself familiar when I go through step one before I start preparing for this exam? So, for step one, I am going to start with this free course that is on the Linux Foundation. The reason I'm starting with the Linux Foundation because these are the people that decide exactly what Linux is. These are the people that make Linux. These are the people that put Linux out. I'm pretty sure they know a little bit about what they're talking about. Not only that, but they're putting out courses like this for free because they want more people to be able to be aware of Linux. They want people to look at this and say, "Wow, Linux is great. I've only seen Windows and Macintosh, but man, y'all really got something going with this." So I'm going to be able to take this course. It's for free. When you enroll in it, it's going to take you to the EDX site, and it has about 60 hours of course material. That's the first thing that I'm going to do. But also, I want to make sure that I have a little base level knowledge of this, even beyond this, and be familiar with some of the other resources out there. So the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to get this for Dummies book, Linux for Dummies. It's going to be $21 and it's on Amazon. I'm going to get the Kindle version for that. And also this other one, Linux All-in-One for Dummies. After that, I am going to complete this course called Become a Linux Administrator on LinkedIn Learning. Now, for me, LinkedIn Learning is free, so I am excited about going through this entire course. It's supposed to be about 26 hours of coursework, but by that time, I'll be pretty familiar with Linux and be able to go through it. So that's what I'm going to do to be able to get familiar with Linux, and this is all before I even start preparing for the LPI exams for LPIC 1, LPIC 2, or the other exams that I'm going to be taking. So from there, I'm going to start moving into step 2. I now have some experience with Linux. I know what Linux is about. I've looked at it from the perspective of the Linux Foundation. I've read some easy reading books on this subject. It's that, I'm okay on Linux now. I'm ready to move forward to start studying for an examination. And before I start talking about the resources that I'm going to use for that, I do want to say that I believe that the issue that a lot of people have with obtaining certifications is that they study only for the certification and not for the broader field that the certification is in. I never like to jump directly into a certification without knowing something broader than just that certification. I want to know the context that the certification works in. And that's why I want to know general Linux information beforehand. And I want to make sure that it's just a nice, warm and fuzzy. So it's not enough to actually know how to do anything that's too advanced, but just a nice little warm and fuzzy. I'm now comfortable with it, and now I can go ahead and sharpen my skills and go for a certification. So for LPIC 1 and LPIC 2, it's going to be pretty much the same resources. I'm a big fan of using the resources that the person that puts a test out puts together. So instead of going to other sources with it, which are going to be just fine, but you want to make sure that you use the resources that are given. At LPI.org, at learning.lpi.org, they put out the resources they have. And the good thing about this is that these are free. For LPIC 1, there's 2 exams. For LPIC 2, there are 2 exams as well. You just go ahead and you get the book for each exam, and you'll be able to start studying for those exams from the perspective of the people that put the exam together. I truly believe that whenever we do this, the answers are going to be within the materials that they put out themselves. And they really want to make sure their materials are good. They want more people to be certified because this is their bread and butter. So it's free. It is there. And I'm also going to share a method for reading. But before that, what else am I going to do? I'm also going to go back to LinkedIn Learning, and they have a learning path for LPIC 1. They also have one for LPIC 2. And in addition to going through the free books that come from LPI, I am going to go through the free course that's on LinkedIn Learning. And it's free for me because I go through my public library, which is the Boston Public Library, and with a Boston Public Library card, you get access to LinkedIn Learning courses for free. So how exactly am I going to be able to prepare for this exam? Because I do want to use the best preparation methods. First, I want to talk about how I'm going to prepare for with the textbooks. The books that are given from LPI. Now, most books are broken down into chapters. This book is broken down into sections, and I'm going to give you a method that I like to use for myself, but also other people might find it really useful. And I call this a leapfrog method. Here's how it works. I'll start out by reading chapter 1 if the book has chapters. Chapter 1, and then after I'm done reading chapter 1, I read chapter 1 again. And after I'm done reading chapter 1 again, then I read chapter 2. And then after that, I'll go back to chapter 1, then chapter 2, then chapter 3, then back to chapter 2, then chapter 3, then chapter 4, then back to chapter 3, then 4, then 5, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 5, then 6, then 7. And then when I get up to 5, around there, I'll go back and I'll just review chapter 1 one more time. So then it gets up to 6, I'll go back and I'll review chapter 2 before moving on. And this way, I'm always reviewing. And this is not to be able to study. This is the way that I get familiar with the content. Here's what ends up happening. Most people, they just study the book from beginning to end. They start in chapter 1 and they try to know everything that's in chapter 1. For me, I started by reading chapter 1. I have no idea what's going on. And that's perfectly fine because if I'm new to the material, I shouldn't have any idea of what's going on. But what I do is like, okay, that was interesting. I then move on to chapter 2. It becomes even more bewildering. But then I go back to chapter 1, and whereas I was bewildered before, because I have something a little bit more advanced in that, I go back to chapter 1. After reading chapter 2, I'm like, oh, this is starting to make a little bit more sense. I then go back to chapter 2. I'm like, oh, I'm starting to get this now. It's not as confusing as it was the first time that I went through it. Then I go ahead and I go to chapter 3, and I'm like, whoa, I'm back to the whole bewilderment stage. I then back it up to chapter 2, and I'm like, oh, now that I've been through this 3 times, I get it. I at least know the content that's there. And then I move back to chapter 3. It was like, oh, this isn't as confusing. So that way, instead of forcing myself to try to understand everything and going through the whole stress and the pressure of trying to understand something the first time through, I just go through it, and then I use this leapfrog method. I try to make sure that I go through the book at least 3 times before I actually start studying for the exam. So I'm going to use the leapfrog method. I put my timer on. I just study. I just read. I just go through the material. I might practice a lot when I come through some of the things that they tell you to practice, like the commands and how to make the commands work. I do practice as I go through the material, but I don't really consider this my test prep. I just want to get as familiar as I possibly can. And by the end of going through the leapfrog method and then going through it 2 more times, by the time that I'm ready to start preparing for the exam in a more focused way and making sure that I got it all down, more than likely, I've been through the material so many times that I actually do have it down. So that's one of the study methods that I use. The other thing that I want to do is that I'm not going to really limit myself in time frame. So it's not like I want to finish a book by next week. Even though I do kind of go through these certifications quickly, it's because I believe that I'm ready to be able to pursue those certifications at that time. So it's going to happen whenever I'm ready, and hopefully that's sooner than later. What that does is that it takes the pressure off of me. But I do intensely study in the times that I do. And what I do is that I study in 30-minute segments where 25 of them are dedicated to study and then a 5-minute break. So for 25 minutes, I focus on just reading, just making it through the material, and I take a 5-minute break. My goal is to finish 10 of these sessions every single day, at least 10. If it's a little bit more, that's great. If it's less, then I might be in a little bit of trouble. What ends up happening is that because I'm working based on time rather than based on events, I'm able to just comfortably make my way through a lot of the material. So, and I surprised myself because, like, oh, wow, just focusing 25 minutes at a time, I can finish a book in 2 or 3 days at most, really. At most, 2 or 3 days. And then after that's done, I can go back and start preparing for the exam and actually studying. And that by that time, things are usually lodged within my mind and I'm able to move forward with actually taking the exam. But it takes a lot of the pressure off of me. And then I'm like, okay, now I know how I can comfortably move forward. So those are some of the study methods that I use. And later on, I am going to use a few more of these study methods, and I'm going to share some videos on how I like to study. For the Linux Foundation Certified Systems Administrator exam, that's LFCS. Now, that's a performance-based exam, and what I'm going to do for that one is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to just go through the material that the Linux Foundation gives. Now, I do want to go with the Linux Foundation because they're the ones that decide what Linux is. It's kind of like vendor neutral and vendor at the same time. It's just that Linux has a number of different distributions, but they're all based on this Linux kernel. And that's what I want to master first, even before I go into things like the Red Hat certification, which I believe is a good one since it seems like Red Hat is just about everywhere in the enterprise world. Hence why it's called Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But they have a course that I've already purchased. You can get the bundle together for $5.95. But as it is right now, it is before August 30th, and they are running a special where you can go ahead and buy the certification exam and you get the course for free. So it's like, oh goody, free course. Now look at this. The course only is $300, so that's like $300 free out of this $5.95. So it's going to be $295, which it was $295 for this $595 value, and I am going to enjoy it as soon as I get through it. So let's see. It's going to be, whoa, look at that. 44 chapters. They say that it's between 50 and 60 hours of course material, and I can't wait to go through it a number of times. So with that, I don't have a plan for how I'm going to make it through Red Hat, but I do believe that I'm going to do that afterwards. And when I come together with a plan, I'll be able to put it out for anybody else to go through. But this is my plan. Step 1 is to get familiar with the material. Step 2 is to go through LPIC 1 and 2 by using the resources available from LPIC and also from LinkedIn Learning, and to use the leapfrog method, study in 25-minute sections, 30-minute sections, try to go through at least 10 sections every single day, which means I'm going to have to wake up a little bit earlier, go to bed a little bit later, and that's going to be perfectly fine because 10 sections of 30 minutes each is only about 5 hours of my time. So if I wake up 2 hours earlier, that's 2 hours. If I go to bed 2 hours later, that's 2 hours there. And if I study over my lunch break at work, that's 1 hour. Nobody's going to miss me. I'm still going to be there for my kids. I'll be there for their first days of school. That school's starting really soon, and no one's even going to be able to know that I am missing to do this at all. And 10 sections and 5 hours a day for me is exceptionally significant. Now, I do want to go over some things that I don't focus on too much. For example, you might notice that in my prep time and in my study method, I don't really focus too much on practice questions. It's not that practice questions are a waste of time. They're just a waste of my time. I don't like questions that much. I do like practicing things. I do like practicing tasks. I like doing those things, but I don't like taking practice questions. My theory behind it is that every practice question that I take will not appear on the exam. So here I am preparing myself for questions and mastering these questions that are almost guaranteed to not be on the exam. And here's why I believe that's the case. For a lot of these exams, the questions are copyrighted and they're not supposed to be leaked outside of the exam. They're supposed to be on the exam only. The only people that are aware of these questions and how they're being asked are the people that have taken the exam and nobody else. They appear on the exam and on the exam only. And if that means that they legally appear on the exam and on the exam only, that means that any question off of the exam is not on the exam. So here I am going, if I were to go through practice questions again and again, then the practice questions will prepare me for everything that's not on the exam. And for that reason, I'd rather just read the chapter of the book all over and over again. If I ever do practice questions, it's that I believe that I am so competent that reading the book again is just going to bore me to no end. And I need something to entertain myself because I practically have memorized the entire book. But besides that, I don't do very many practice questions. Another thing that I want to talk about is how a lot of people psych themselves out a little bit when it comes to multiple choice questions. Just to let you know, I would prefer performance-based questions to multiple choice questions any day. And I have a very good reason for that. And I believe that once I explain it, you're going to agree with me for you as well. Some people believe that multiple choice questions are easier when, if you've been in the tech field long enough, you know that multiple choice questions are always going to be harder. Performance-based questions tell me that I know what I'm doing. And usually I do know what I'm doing. It's just that I don't always know how to explain exactly what I'm doing. And let me give you an example of this as well. I'm going to give you the performance-based method of it, and then I'm going to talk about how it translates over to how it might appear on the exam. You see, let's say that the task was something like saving a document from a word processor to a PDF format. That's what you have to do. So let's say that somebody is on, say you're on help desk and someone calls you and they have a lot of questions. As a matter of fact, remember that, and I'm going to explain that as my second one. So if I were to ask you to be able to save a document as a PDF and to perform that task, I'm pretty sure that most people, even if you're not a techie person, you will be able to do that. But the way that it would appear on a test, well, if it was multiple choice, it would say, when saving a document as a PDF, what do you do after hitting the file menu option? So it's like, okay, so what exactly do I do after hitting the file menu option? It's like, okay, this is that whole classic, are a cow's horns in front or behind their ears? It's like, well, if I saw the cow right now, I would know, but the cow's not in front of me. You see, in performance-based questions, the answers are actually right there in front of you. You can see the cow right there, so you know the answer. With multiple choice questions, you don't have the substance in front of you, so now you have to recreate everything from memory. So it's like, okay, here it is. After hitting the file menu option, what do I do? And then you would have an answer in your mind, but then the answers are going to be something like, click the print option in the menu. Or B, select save as PDF option. C, go to export options. D, go into the save menu. So with that, it's like, whoa. I do know for a fact how to save a document as a PDF, but what do I do after hit file? If I was looking at it, I would know exactly what to do. But you're asking me, what do I do? Do I hit the click the print option? I mean, yeah, that's definitely one way to be able to save a PDF. So do I select save as PDF option? Wait, is that even an option there? And then you have to start thinking, maybe it is, because if I'm trying to save it as a PDF, maybe it's as simple as clicking save to PDF. But I don't even know if that's an option because I don't have it in front of me right now. Do I go to export options? I mean, yeah, that's another thing that I could do. I could technically export it as a PDF. Or do I go into the save menu? Okay, yeah, I think that's what I do, because I go to save as, and then in the save menu, it's like save as a PDF, a docx, a .doc, a .odt. So which one is it? Because with these, I'm sure with 3 of them, I can make it work. And with the 4th option, I'm not even sure if that's an option. And this is what trips us up when it comes to multiple choice questions. This is why the way that I answer multiple choice questions is very performance-based. What I do is that before I even start looking at the options, I look at the question, and then I try to solve the question myself without looking at the options. And then after I come to my own answer, I'll just pick whichever option most closely resembles mine. I don't do the whole try to narrow things down, try to throw one out. None of that really matters. because what I want to know is that I actually know the answer without any options being given to me. Now, before I started talking about this, I talked about how on help desk it can actually help you understand that performance based is a lot easier than multiple choice questions. For example, a person might call in and say that they have a problem, something's not working. They start telling you things and they ask you what needs to be done. And there you are, because it's not in front of you, you're drawing a blank. Well, I don't know what needs to be done. I need to see what's happening in order to tell you what needs to be done. And then you ask them, well, what are you seeing? They can't really explain it, but they ask you, well, I just want this to happen. What do I do next? I don't know what to do next. I'm not sitting there with it in front of you to look at it. I mean, if I was there, I'd get this done probably in 10 seconds. You see, that's performance based. If I were there, I would get this done. But since I have to answer your questions and then tell you what to do, I don't know without looking at it. And this is why I always say that the whole dichotomy of whether or not multiple choice questions are easier or performance-based questions are easier, they're just as hard as one another. They both have their own challenges. The only issue that comes with this is that people psych themselves out a lot when it comes to performance-based questions, thinking that they're harder than multiple choice questions because we're used to multiple choice questions and we've done them our entire lives. But the reality is that when you're in the tech world, performance-based is going to be your go-to, and you can perform a lot better than you can answer what you're performing about. And I gave it a great example with the whole PDF thing. You know how to save a PDF. Would you be able to tell people exactly what to do? Or would you even be able to get this specific? Or how about this? In real life, would it matter to be this specific if you can just do it? Who cares if you can't answer a multiple choice question about it? So finally, I want to end up by talking about what happens if my plan fails. If my plan fails, then I fail. Simple as that. And I'm not afraid to fail any of these exams. They're difficult for anybody. They're an achievement for anyone to pass. But I go through this and I take these tests quickly because I'm really not afraid to fail. All that says is that I'm willing to invest money into something and that I'm just not ready right now. That I need to spend a little bit more time to be ready. The good part about it is, like, if I ever fail an exam, then I do know that the day after the exam, I'm better than the day that I took it. And 2 days later, I'm better than the day before. And then 3 days later, I just keep getting better and better and better. So it really doesn't matter if I fail this exam. It doesn't say anything about me or anything else. It just says that I was not prepared at that moment of time. And the worst case scenario is that I lose a little bit of money. And I'm also not afraid to lose money, at least not right now, because, I mean, I burn through money all the time. I spend $80 on Chinese food in a restaurant when really I could have just, built a time machine and gone back to like 2001 in New York and got a $5 plate. Okay, I can't go back in time. But what I'm trying to say is, like, now I care about burning money after spending $80 on Chinese food dinners multiple times this month. After all the other things that I burn money on, I'm scared of burning money? Like, nah, let me not psych myself out. I'm perfectly fine with burning money in other places. If anything, I'd rather burn money here than to burn money in all the other places that I burn money. So with that, I'm just not afraid to fail an exam. And that's why I can boldly go forward with doing these things and planning these things and even doing things the way that people tell me are the wrong way to do it. And I can do this because I literally have no fears. I'm progressing. Just taking the exam is part of the step in the progress. If I pass the exam, then wonderful. If I don't pass the exam, the progress does not stop. Well, here's my plan on passing the LPIC 1, LPIC 2, and the Linux Foundation Certified Sysadmin exams. I'm also going to go for Red Hats. I hope that this is found useful by somebody else, but this is my plan. I'm going to stick to it. I cannot wait to see the results and also the growth that happens within me as I do all of this.